glad to have you here as we are continuing on our series. As we have worked our way through the Bible, we have made it to the part that we have called Word Made Flesh. And the reason we are calling it that is because it is God. He had spoken out through the Old Testament, through men, through prophets, but he comes to earth in the form of Jesus. And so his word is made flesh in the person of Jesus. And so we just really feel like God, who comes to earth in the person of Jesus, we as Jesus followers should pay very close attention to what he teaches, to what he says, to how he lives his life. And so that's what we're doing as we work through the New Testament now, especially the Gospels. And last week we looked that we can't out-sin God's love, but that we also can't earn it. And usually we fall into one of those categories. We think we've out-sinned it and he can't love us, or we think we can do enough to earn it, and really neither is true. And today we're going to look at a similar theme on forgiveness, but today it's really not a teaching of Jesus. It's not something that Jesus gathered a group and taught them. It's really more of an interaction that Jesus had with one of his disciples that we get to sneak in onto. We get to hear, we get to observe, we get to be the fly on the wall and see what happened. And I think this is really an important thing for us to see because I think all of us at some point either have had or we will have this same interaction that we're going to look at today with Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you're considering being a follower of Jesus, I think you will either you have had at some point, or you will have in the future this interaction with Jesus. I'm a big sports fan. I watch a lot of sports. Anybody watch college football yesterday? Yeah. I've seen a lot of CU gear this year. I didn't see much last year, but this year it's everywhere. I'm going to get a hoodie as well. One of the things I've noticed, especially in sports, it happens in other areas of life, but especially in sports, at the end of a long season or a tournament, a losing team gets interviewed. A coach gets interviewed. The star player gets interviewed. And it's usually in a close game where they just barely lost. And they say something along these lines. One of the athletes or one of the coaches, they say, listen, I know we came up short today, but it has been a great season, and I wouldn't change a thing. And I've always thought, really? You wouldn't change anything? You lost by 3 points and you dropped a touchdown during the game. Like, you wouldn't change that? You wouldn't have caught that touchdown? Right? You wouldn't change anything? A few weeks ago, I was watching the show Ninja Warrior. Anybody ever watch that show? Yeah. It's amazing at how they swing from these bars. I'm very jealous of them, and I was watching it. And a young man had made it through several stages, and he's halfway through this next stage. And if you fall, you're out. And he swings from one bar to the next, and he falls into the water. And after the lady on the sidelines is interviewing him, she told me about that run, how it was amazing. It was great. I've trained so hard, and I wouldn't change a thing. That's what he said. And I thought, not even one thing. Like, you wouldn't change the fact that you missed that bar? If you could do it over, you would actually grab the bar and be able to move on to the next round, right? You wouldn't change a thing. And here's why I think I always struggle with that, is because I think there's this universal truth. Now, I don't really know everything about all of you in this room today, but I know this is true. We have regrets. You have a regret. I have a regret. Some of us have multiple regrets. This is a universal truth. No one lives their life, and at the end of life is like, nope, everything was great. I wouldn't change a single thing. We all have regrets. In fact, probably just saying that right now is taking you to a regret that you're like, thanks, Michael. I had just worked through that, right? I had just gotten over that. I just gotten past it. We all have regrets. How do I know that we all have regrets? Because we're all sinners. We're all sinners. We all make poor decisions. We all make bad choices in life. Sometimes it's just one choice. Sometimes it's just one decision. Sometimes it's a series. Like, you might be able to think back in your life and think, what was I thinking for that 4 years? It was just constant bad choice after bad choice. And we have regrets in life. And because we all have regrets, we think through things. I made a bad business decision that time. I should have never done that. And what about that marriage? I made some bad decisions in my marriage. That was horrible. I have regrets. Parenting decisions. The longer you parent, the more you lay down at night and go, man, I wasn't a great parent today. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. We've spent money on things. We've all done this, right? You've bought something you've longed for, you've desired, you've saved or went in debt usually for, and then you get it home, and a little bit later you're going, I shouldn't have bought that, right? Like you have a regret. We have regrets. And all of these regrets play a part. They culminate also into us and our relationship with Jesus. If you're a Jesus follower, you probably have had regrets in your life about how you follow Jesus. Maybe even right now, maybe even bring this up, something in you is saying, man, I have not been lately committed to my relationship with Jesus. At some point, we make decisions in life that cause regrets in all these areas, but it also is true about our relationship with Jesus. We make decisions that impact our relationship with him. And this is exactly the interaction we're going to see in John chapter 21 today. If you have a Bible, I'd love for you to turn there or open it on your phone. If you don't have one, it'll be on the screens, and we have some in the back for you. It's our gift to you on your way out. But in John chapter 21, we see Jesus and Peter. And we find Peter in this moment of his life, and he is just full of regret. And Peter does something we see here in this passage that if we're not careful, we are tempted to do, or maybe we have done. We've allowed regret about the past to determine our future. Right? We've allowed some regret that we have about the past to determine our future. That's probably been you. That's certainly been me, that I think about what I've done in the past, and it determines the decisions I make next. It impacts me in the future, and often in a negative way, because we're tempted to be embarrassed about the choice we made, the decision we made. And we allow the regret about the past determine our future out of embarrassment, out of shame. And the good news for us is we're not the first to do this. This goes back since the beginning of mankind, that shame about a decision, shame about sin, shame about our past causes us to have regrets in our life. The good news is we get to see how Jesus deals with it. So you have to do me a favor today. We're going to put in a little work this morning. I know it's a holiday weekend, but you got up and got dressed, and most of you did your hair, and you came here and you are ready. So we're going to do some work. Are you with me this morning? All right, a few of you are. The rest of you can copy off their paper. We're going to cover 19 verses this morning. So you're going to have to stay with me, but I think it will be worth it for you. And here's why. Is because in these 19 verses, Jesus, I think, paints one of the most beautiful pictures for my life. I think he paints one of the most beautiful pictures for your life. And we're going to see this over this 19 verses. And at the end of this, we're going to see the hope that we have in Jesus in spite of our regrets. So let's start reading in verse 1 of John 21. It says, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. So Jesus has revealed himself 2 times already. He has been crucified. He died on a cross. He has risen again, and now he is no longer walking earth in physical humanity form, but he is in the resurrected body of Jesus, a perfect body. And so he has appeared to his followers at least twice. We're going to see in a minute this will be the 3rd time. And so it says this as we keep reading. He revealed himself in this way: Simon Peter, and Thomas, called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, Zebedee's sons, that's James and John, and 2 other of his disciples were together. So there's 7 disciples. They're all hanging out together. Jesus has died and resurrected, and so they're hanging out. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter said to them. We're coming with you, they told him. And so they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. And so if you don't know this about Peter, Peter was a fisherman. When he was first called by Jesus to be a disciple, do you know what he was doing when Jesus called him? He was fishing. That was a pretty easy one. Good job, guys. He was fishing. He is a fisherman. Nothing has changed in his life. And so Jesus is killed, and he is resurrected, and these men go back to life. We'll see in a minute that Peter has failed miserably. He's supposed to be this great leader, and he is filled with regret right now. But he did what most of us do. He let this failure, he let this regret draw him back to where he once was, not propel, not push him, not motivate him on to something better. He allowed his regret to draw him back to the man that he was before Jesus called him. And we've probably all been there, right? I know I've been there. I've made a bad decision. I've made a choice in my life that I regretted. I've chosen my way over God's way. I have sinned in my life. And instead of accepting the forgiveness of my Heavenly Father, I allow that regret, I allow that remorse, I allow that sorrow to draw me away. I retreat from the forgiveness that God gives me. And instead of embracing His forgiveness, I embrace my regret. And that's what Peter does right here. He goes back to what he knows. He goes back to what he's good at. He goes back to what he can make a living at doing. He goes back to where he finds self-fulfillment and identity. He was at his core a fisherman. He goes back to where he was before Jesus ever called him to fishing. But it's not going good for him. Let's keep reading in verse 4. When daybreak came, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't know it was him. Friends, Jesus called to them, "You don't have any fish, do you?" And so if you think Jesus was serious all the time, this is an example of him not being serious all the time. Because his boys are out on the lake, and he knows they've been out there. And this is Jesus. And Jesus is who now? Let's say it all together. This is a big one. Jesus is who? He's God. He knows what's in the nets. He knows what's in the boats. And yet on the shore, he shouts out to him, hey guys, you happen to have any fish in there? Right? He knows that they do not have any fish in their boat. And it's clearly been a long night. Peter is thinking, I've messed up. I tried to follow Jesus, and now I'm not sure how that looks, so I'm going to go back to fishing. So he goes back to fishing. He's fished all night. He hasn't caught a stinking fish. He's frustrated. And look at his in-depth response. Do you have any fish? Jesus says. No. That's all he could shout back from the boat. There's no excuse. There's no reasoning behind this. There's no why are you asking? He's just, I'm not even sure he looked up. He just shouts back, no. That's it. And I think, this is not in the text, okay? But I think if we were standing next to Jesus on the shore, we would have heard him chuckle. Like we would have heard him laugh at Peter's response of, no, I don't have any fish. And so look what Jesus tells him. Cast the net on the right side of the boat, he told them, and you'll find some. And so they did. And they were unable to haul it in because of the large number of fish. And the disciple, the one Jesus loved, said to Peter, it is the Lord. And now, in case you think the disciples are unlike us, if you think, hey, the disciples are some group of super spiritual people that we can never be, they lived a life that we can never live. This little part of the story here is a great example of how they were just like us, because we read from other authors that John, who was one of the disciples, was often called the one Jesus loved. But in this text, John is the author. And he still takes the time to point out to everybody for the rest of mankind who is going to read this, that the one Jesus loved, which was who? Himself, right? He's like, it's like you writing, and mom's favorite kid, right? Like that's what John's doing right here. He's pointing it out, okay? So not super spiritual. We can attain this level here. He reminds everyone he's the one Jesus loved. And look what it says. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tied his outer clothing around him, so he had taken it off and plunged into the sea. And since they were not far from land, about 100 yards away, the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish. So they can't even haul the net in. They just drag it in the water. And when they got out on land, they saw, what did they see? I need you to say this with these two words. They saw a what? Charcoal fire. This is going to be big in just a minute. It was there with fish lying on it and bread. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus told them. And so Simon Peter climbed up and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. So just like guys are today, they remember every detail about fishing, right? They're like, yeah, they were large. I had about 153, right? They knew what was up here. Even though there were so many, the net was not torn. Come have breakfast, Jesus told them. And this is a big moment for Peter. He doesn't know it. But this is a big moment. He's called over to this charcoal fire. And I'm sure when he walked on shore and he saw this charcoal fire, he paused. I'm sure he stopped in his tracks because it made him think back to not long ago, to a moment in his life. In fact, the only other time in the Gospel of John that a charcoal fire is mentioned, it involved Peter. If you look back in John 18, Verse 17, John says this about a fire. Then the servant girl who was the doorkeeper said to Peter, "You aren't one of the man's disciples too, are you?" "I'm not," he said. Now the servants and the officials had made a what? Charcoal fire, because it was cold. And they were standing there warming themselves, and Peter was standing with them warming himself. A charcoal fire is the place that Peter had denied that he knew Jesus 3 times. It was around a fire that he finds himself around now on this beach a little while earlier, that he had stood and denied Jesus. Jesus is being brutalized. He is being interrogated. He is being beaten on his way to the cross to die. And around this fire 3 times, Peter is asked, weren't you with Jesus? And 3 times he says, no. And so he gets to shore excited because Jesus is there. But when he gets there, there's a charcoal fire. Can you imagine the emotions that he felt? This would be equal to whatever that thing is in your life that brings regret into your mind, that you're ashamed of, that you're embarrassed of, that you just want to get past. It would be Jesus saying to you, hey, let's meet there. It would be Jesus saying, hey, that business decision that you lied about and you cheated your way through to help your business, let's meet in that boardroom and talk. It would be Jesus saying to you in that marriage that ended in divorce because you didn't lead and you didn't love the way that you should. It would be Jesus saying, hey, let's meet around that kitchen table. It would be Jesus saying to you where that addiction started, hey, let's meet there and hang out for a little bit. It would instantly bring up this overwhelming sense of shame and embarrassment to the person. And that's what it did for Peter. That choice, that decision, that action that brings us shame, that keeps us from moving forward. For Peter, it had happened that night around a fire. When he did what he had said that he would never do. Because just before the night at the fire, he's with Jesus. And Jesus says, you're going to leave me. And he says, no, Jesus, if everybody else leaves you, I will never leave you. That's what he tells Jesus. That's what he tells the disciples. He makes this claim. I will never leave you. And then just a little bit longer around the fire, he does exactly what he said he would never do. And Jesus, on this morning, meets him back by that fire. And look what Jesus does next. It's huge. It's so significant. He's about to teach Peter something that I think he still teaches us today if we'll let him. That's this, that your relationship with the Father defines you, not your failure. I think Jesus brought him up to this fire. I think he brings you back to the place of regret and remorse and sorrow and shame because he wants you to know that it's your relationship with your Heavenly Father that defines you, not your failure. And this is so true, but it's so hard to believe about ourselves. But listen, if it's true, and we say this all the time, I have this conversation all the time, that your identity should not be tied up in your successes and your wins and in how much money you make and in how good it looks to the people around you. If that is true, the opposite is also true. Your identity can also not be tied up in your failures and in your shortcoming and in the fact that you're a sinner. Your identity can't be wrapped up in the highs, but it also can't be tied to the lows. Your identity, my identity, Peter's identity is only found in a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus is about to show Peter, he's about to show us this. And he does it so wonderfully. He invites Peter and the others to have a meal with them, but not to rebuke him. Look why he does it in verse 15. When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said to them. You know that I love you. Feed my lambs, he told him. What a question in that moment for him to pull Peter over and ask him. I mean, think of the emotions. Think of the emotions that Peter is going through. On the top of his mind is his cowardice, his betrayal. That's what he is thinking about. That's all that's on his mind. And Jesus pulls him over and says, Peter, do you love me more than these? Now, there's some debate about what he's talking about here. Some scholars think that maybe he's saying, hey, Peter, do you love me more than you do these other men, these other disciples? That's an option. Some scholars believe that maybe he was saying, hey, Peter, do you love me more than these men love me? Which is also an option. But the third option that scholars believe, and I think this is the one that makes the most sense, this is the one that I lean to, is that as he stood there with Peter over a fire cooking fish, he looked down and said, Peter, do you love me more than these? He was talking about the fish. He was talking about what Peter had just ran back to. When Peter felt remorse, when Peter felt sorrow, when Peter thought he was a failure, and he ran back to the one thing he knew. Peter was a fisherman. That's where he was when Jesus found him. That's what he went back to after he failed, after he betrayed Jesus. His identity was in fishing. He felt secure in fishing. He felt like he could provide for his family in fishing. He felt like he could be something to the community through fishing. By all accounts, more than anything else, he was a fisherman. And Jesus looks at the fish and says to a brokenhearted, ashamed, and defeated Peter, hey, Peter, do you love me more than you love these? And Peter says, yes. And notice what Jesus doesn't say. He doesn't say, well, Peter, it sure doesn't seem like it. All right, what are you doing out there fishing? It doesn't seem like you love me more than these. Peter, it doesn't seem like it because just a few weeks ago, people were asking if you knew me and you said you didn't even know who I was. Right? He doesn't look to the other disciples and say, hey boys, Peter says he loves me more than the fish, but what do you think? It doesn't seem like that, right? He doesn't call him over to rebuke him. He doesn't say any of that. He says, feed my sheep. Or in other words, he says, then Peter, if you love me, just keep doing what I've called you to do. And Jesus is so gracious. Look what he does next. Verse 16. A second time Jesus asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, he said to him. You know that I love you. Shepherd my sheep, he told him. And then he asked him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved. Peter's upset now that he was asked the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep, Jesus said. 3 times, Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? And 3 times he says, then just do what I've called you to do. Just be faithful to what I have called you to do. And this was a huge moment for Peter. Because remember how many times around a charcoal fire Peter had denied that he even knew Jesus? It was 3. 3 times that night around a different fire. He was asked, weren't you a follower of Jesus? And he had said no. And in this moment around another charcoal fire, Jesus 3 times says, do you love me? Then do what I've called you to do. Jesus is offering him full forgiveness, full restoration to Peter. Jesus is saying to Peter, Peter, listen, I know what you did. I know what you said, but I know that you've repented. I know that you love me. You're forgiven. And I've called you to something that you cannot let regret keep you from doing. And here's why this conversation mattered so much. Because in Jesus, the hope for our future is greater than the regret about our past. The only thing that will get you over the regret about your past, I'm telling you, it's not more relationships, it's not more money, it's not more thing that you might get addicted to. The only thing that will get you over your regret about the past is the hope you find in Jesus. Jesus is telling Peter what he tells us. Nothing in your past is a lost cause. Right? That business deal, that marriage that fell apart, that kid that you could have parented better, that friendship that blew up because you guys stopped getting along. Jesus says, no. I forgive you in all of that, and I can use all of that to shape you and mold you for who I want you to be and what I want you to do. And this is hard for us because this is not like our forgiveness, is it? Because when we tell somebody who does something wrong to us, we say, hey, listen, I forgive you. But in the back of our minds, what are we thinking? But I still remember what you did. And if it gets bad again, I'm going to bring it up, right? Like, I've still got this card, and if I need to play it again, I'm going to. I forgive you kind of if you get your act together. That's how we think about forgiveness. But Jesus is saying, no. I forgive you completely. And this forgiveness should change us like it changed Peter. Peter left the beach that day for the last time. He left the boats, he left the fishing gear to follow Jesus, to keep doing what Jesus had called him to do, not to earn forgiveness. Which one happened first? Peter following or the forgiveness? The forgiveness happened, and then Peter followed. He followed because he was forgiven. Look in verse 18. This is Jesus talking. He says, "Truly I tell you, when you were younger, you would tie your belt and walk wherever you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will tie you and carry you where you don't want to go." He said this to indicate by what kind of death Peter would glorify God. And after saying this, he told him, "Follow me." And so if you don't know Peter's history, Jesus dies on the cross and Peter runs as a coward. He's done. I'm going to go back to my way of life. And then Jesus has this interaction with him on the beach and says, no, you need to understand. I'm still Jesus. I'm still God. I'm still in control. And I forgive you, Peter. Now I need you to get busy doing what I've called you to do. And Peter never runs from that calling again. The man who was once a coward ends up dying on a cross just like Jesus did. He ends up standing for his faith, standing for his belief in Jesus, teaching others about Jesus to the point they said, "Peter, we're going to kill you if you don't stop talking." And he said, "Kill me if you must, but I can't deny what I have seen." And he dies on a cross for Jesus. And like Peter, we should live our lives not to earn forgiveness, but because we are forgiven. See, when you and I, when we realize that in Jesus, God gives us forgiveness, that it's not earned. We don't do anything. We bring nothing to God and say, here's my offering of goodness and greatness and deeds. Will you forgive me? None of that is good enough. He just invites us and says, "I forgive you because I love you." When we understand that, when we accept that, it changes how we live. What a moment for John to capture. I'm so thankful that John apparently was an eavesdropper and he's off to the side listening to this story. Because like I said at the start, I know this about my life and I know this about your life. We all have regrets. You have failed, I have failed. You have sinned, I have sinned, and I will again. Here's the problem is we let Satan, who is described as the father of lies, lie to us. And he says, you have sinned too much. You have failed too much. You have made too poor of decisions. You can never return to God, or you can never go to him for the first time. You are too far gone. Salvation and forgiveness is not for you because you are a mess. Right? Satan lies to us. He says, "I thought you were a follower of Jesus, but look how you treated him. Look what you did." And he shames us into silence. He shames us back to the boats, back to the fish, back to trying to find our identity in something other than Jesus. And the truth is, Jesus isn't pushing us away. He is inviting us back to him. And Jesus asks us what he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And here's why he asks that. Because even though we sin, even though we make mistakes, even though we mess up and we fail, even though God offers forgiveness, here's why Jesus asks that. It's because of this. Because what you love, you live for. It's true about all of us. What you love, you live for. You prioritize what you love. You schedule what you love. You spend money on what you love. You grow in what you love. You expand your understanding in what you love. I like to hunt. We have any hunters in here? Anybody hunt? A few of you, raise your hands. Yeah. I like to hunt, and I'm okay at it, but my life doesn't revolve around it. But I have some friends that, like I have this one friend, I've been in the car with him multiple times, and he had a turkey call in his mouth as we're driving somewhere doing his turkey call and talking to me through a turkey call, right? It's not turkey season. Turkey season's not coming up. He's just training for that day when he sees the golden turkey, just training. I have some friends that if we're going somewhere, they say, "Hey, I'll drive," and then we start going, and they don't go the way to the place. Like we're going from point A to point B. They go this way. And you know why they go that way? Because the other day, they saw a deer standing in a field out there, and they just want to drive by and see if they see that animal out there again and just dream about hunting, right? So I like hunting. I don't carry a turkey call around in my pocket. and I don't go out of my way in case I see a deer again in a field somewhere because I like it. They love it, right? I like to golf. Anybody in here like to golf? Anybody? A few of you, raise your hands. Anybody any good at golf? Yeah, I don't believe you. I like to golf. I have some golf clubs. I've had them for about 22 years. They're a nice set of golf clubs. They're hanging in my garage. I get them out every now and then and take the cobwebs off and go hit some golf balls. I'm going to hit a shot on the golf course where you're going to be like, man, Tally knows how to play golf. I'm also going to hit a shot on the golf course where you're going to go, oh, this is his first time ever hitting a golf ball, right? On at least one hole, I'm going to throw the club farther than I hit the ball. It's just going to happen. I just need to relieve all that pressure in me. Don't judge me. God's still working on me. It's just going to happen, right? But I have some friends. I have a friend that every other year he buys an entirely new set of golf clubs. Now listen, he's not on the PGA Tour. He's not getting paid to golf. And have you looked at the price of golf clubs? It's crazy. Every other year he buys a new set of golf clubs. It's crazy. I have a friend who has an app on his phone, and when we go golfing, we tee off, and neither one of us are any good, and so we just walk to our ball because there's no point to go to the cart. That's farther than the ball is, and so we get to the ball, and he pulls out his phone, and he gets this app, and he's seeing where he's at, and I'm like, man, I'm not real sure 7 feet in front of the tee box is registered in the app yet as far as distance, and he's doing it, and he pulls out the scope, and he hits the ball, and it goes, 30 yards, and I'm like, I'm not sure all this technology, but he has it all. If you looked at his bag, you'd be like, is Tiger Woods playing here? Like, it's the nicest stuff, right? Here's the difference. I like to golf. He loves to golf. He loves golfing. What's the difference? I like hunting. I like golfing. But they love it. They love it. And when you love something, you live for it. It influences everything else you do. It impacts every decision you make. You're always thinking about it. You're saving money to spend on it. You're doing research about it. You tell others about it. You try to get them involved in what you're doing. You want them to love it as much as you love it. And so here's the question I often wrestle with in my life, and maybe you can wrestle with it this week. It's this: do I like Jesus or do I love Jesus? Right? Do I like Jesus? Or do I love Jesus? Because love always includes responsibility. Love always includes sacrifice. Love often includes some suffering. You can remember it like this: love permanently changes your heart, like temporarily changes your behavior. See, if you love something, it changes you from the inside out. If you like something, you modify how you behave, how you live for a short period of time. But if you love something, it changes everything about you. And Jesus knew this. And so he pulled Peter in close and he said 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Peter said yes. When you love Jesus, you live different because your heart has been changed. What matters most has been changed. And even though you have regrets, even though I have regrets, even though we have messed up, God is gracious with us like he was with Peter to forgive us. And he draws us back to him, to the place of our regret, to the place of our sin, to the place of our shame. And he says, do you love me? Because I forgive you. And when he shows us his great love like that, it should ignite our love for him. So let me leave you with a couple of questions. Here's the first one. What regret do you need to accept God's forgiveness? I know in a room this size, somebody in here is probably still beating themselves over a recent decision, a long time ago decision. You're still beating yourself up about it. And you're not allowing God to use you. You're not receiving and accepting his forgiveness. And listen, I'm telling you, as a follower of Jesus, or if you're exploring following Jesus, he is inviting you around the fire to say to you, do you love me? I forgive you. And his forgiveness is full. His forgiveness is complete. What regret do you need to accept God's forgiveness for? And then the last question is this: do you live as though you love Jesus more than anything else? And this is a really hard question. Because I find often in my life, I live as though I really, really, really like Jesus. But it's when I live my life as though I love Jesus that it changes everything. It changes how I parent. It changes how I'm a husband. It changes how I'm a pastor. It changes how I'm a neighbor. It changes how I handle my finances. It changes where I spend my time and my energy and my effort. It changes my priorities. When I love Jesus, it changes everything about me, just like it did Peter, who went from liking Jesus, then denying Jesus, then realizing he loved Jesus and living his life for him. Let's pray together. God, thank you that we get to hear the conversation you had with Peter, that you invited him into your arms to tell him that you forgive him. And so today, this morning, God, I pray for anyone who is here who does not have a relationship with you, that they would hear that same invitation from you, that you invite them to you, to tell them that you love them and that you forgive them and that you have a plan and a purpose for their life. And so this morning, if someone is here who has never surrendered their life to you, I pray, God, that they would acknowledge that you sent your son Jesus to die on the cross for their sins, to die to pay the punishment for their sins, and that Jesus rose again, defeating death and defeating sin so that they could have an eternal relationship with their heavenly Father, their Creator. They could walk in relationship with God. I pray today that they would understand that and that they would accept that and that they would walk into your arms of forgiveness and love. And for those who are here who have surrendered their life to you, who have called on you, Jesus, to be their Savior, God, I pray that we would just be convicted to our core to love you and not just like you. That we would not settle for a life where we like you, but we would live a life that's founded in, that's rooted in, that's based out of our love for you. And God, when Satan comes to us as he has and as he will, and he lies to us and he draws us into our regret, into our sorrow, into our shame, and he does that to paralyze us, that we would say, no, I know that I am forgiven and that I love God and he loves me, and we continue to pursue you and your call on our life. God, thank you for your gracious love to us through your son, Jesus. Help us to live in light of that. In your name we pray. Amen.